after hearing all these amazing speakers and talking to so many of you over yesterday and even last evening and this morning, I could give 10 different speeches right now. And each one of them would be important and relevant because of where Australia is in its evolution with the cannabis industry. And I hope to be continuing a dialogue here about how you can move your laws forward to not have to have the incubator and the missteps that we've had in the United States across the 23 states, and then of course the remaining, my math, 27 states that are still not participating in medical cannabis. I'm also going to talk about how cannabis just became a global issue for me, personally. I was not able to travel with my medicine, which I'm required to use. At one point, I was in a wheelchair. I was on fentanyl patches. I was methadone. The list was just a nightmare. And I was able to medicate before I got on the plane from Los Angeles to fly to Sydney. But in the time since then, I've not had access to my miraculous medication that keeps me as a functioning, highly functioning human being. As a result, I have been in pain. I've been focused on, how uncomfortable I am. My enjoyment of my experience and my quality of life has deteriorated exponentially. And this is only in 48 hours. I can't even imagine the suffering and the needless suffering that's going on throughout this country and throughout the world because of the inability to access this miraculous plant. Okay, got that over with. Now I would like to move on. Aunt Zelda's is the name of our collective. For those of you who are not familiar with the legal structure in California, we either have collectives, cooperatives, or dispensaries. And these are all required to be nonprofit corporations. We are not allowed to make money with these. This is all done as a way of working collectively to have suppliers of the medicine in its raw form, sent in whatever forms are necessary, taken to a place where somebody can then give the medicine to the appropriate and they make a donation back. This is a ridiculous way to run a pharmacy, which is basically what it is. It's depending upon people feeling like growing the right strains. It's dependent upon people, doing it correctly. It's getting it to you consistently, being able to meet a price that they're interested in a donation. And as a result, our supply chain is greatly impacted. That's also not what you came here to hear me talk about. Anyway, so I'm here to talk about pediatric cancer and cannabis. I'm going to start out and I'm going to spend some time explaining this right here because I think it is key to really understanding, and I'll supply a copy of this to anybody that wants, they'll let me know and I'll get you a copy. Cannabis can be dosed, and it can be dosed consistently, and you can know what's in your medicine, you can know how to take your medicine, and you can have understanding ahead of time of what your side effects are going to be, if there are going to be any, what the expectation is of a dose. You can plan your life. You don't have to go, it's a crapshoot. I might take it today and feel this way, take it tomorrow, I'll feel that way. You can be highly functional consistently over time and not just by crop to crop or extract that you're able to get somewhere from time to time. The inconsistencies that are out there in medicating just because of whether the plants were picked in the morning or if the plants were picked in the afternoon, whether it's the top flowers, the middle flowers, the bottom flowers, whether there was excessive moisture, sun, whatever, molds are a huge problem. All of these things taken into consideration, there's too many different variables to have an expectation of consistency without some sort of testing to go into the understanding of what's in the products. You're dealing with a very, very, very important medicine, a life-healing medicine. A suggestion I make to the people that talk about this as food and also that talk about this as people growing their own, I would say that it equates to microbrewers. It's an understanding of, there's no reason you can't make your own for yourself, but you can't go out and make it available to anyone beyond your own neighbors and yourself. It's not something to be done on a national level or to be turned into a serious medicine that anybody can have access to. I love to drink wine, but I don't own a vineyard. I do not have the capability of making wine. That's why I live in Sonoma County, California. Anyway, the way that this shoot works here is if you look, there was 2 strains that were used. This patient X happened to be a child that has had a brain tumor, 7 years old. But I just used this I pulled this up randomly as an example. The Blue Dream is a commonly known strain throughout the world. It's a high in THC. It's lower in CBD. In fact, rarely is there even very much of any of it present in the plant. It also has a very interesting set of terpenes that are very different depending on where it's grown, and some people just throw the name Blue Dream on it. Blue Dream, that's wonderful for sleep, it's wonderful for pain, it's wonderful for a lot of things, unless it's not really Blue Dream. And then it can cause anxiety, it can cause depression, it can cause all sorts of things. So knowing what a Blue Dream is and knowing that that means that there's an expectation of these cannabinoids and these terpenes that we've all heard so much about through the last day and this morning with Dr. Bierman's talk, that these all work together as medicines. The same way if you were to bake a cake, and you would, let's use marinara sauce, pasta sauce. You're going to add rosemary, it's going to do something to it. You add basil and sage, it does something to it. It changes it. It's the same thing with the terpenes that are in the cannabis plants itself. The terpenes that are in there are the enhancements that make it all work together. And just like anything else, you put it in the refrigerator overnight, you eat it the next day, it's much better. Well, cannabis, they does the work for you in the plant itself. You don't have to. It's a perfect mixture on its own. It's just figuring out which the right flavor for you, which one is going to be the best match to your particular health issues. So what we've done is we took a Blue Dream strain here, let me turn this, that had 62% THC, and that means it had 620 milligrams per gram of THC. Now this was in an extracted form, kind of like you've seen the tar, the ones that's the black. It's often in syringes that people use where they dose with it effectively. We use an ethanol extraction. It's a 190 ethanol extraction, which has been found to be truly the most medicinal one to use. You hear butane and naphtha and hexane and I don't care how many parts per million they get it down to. I don't want any parts per million in my medicine. And so there's no confusion. Isopropyl alcohol is poison, okay? So people that say they use medical grade ISO, that means great. Clean your medical grade counters with it, but don't make medicine. It has to be food grade and ethanol, 190. Now, we are certainly investigating, and we've done quite a bit of experimentation already with subcritical, here I say subcritical CO2 extraction methodologies. But it's a much more complex in recapturing the terpenes. And also the decarboxylation process, if it's done post extraction, is very, very touchy, especially with your high CBD strains. CBD is a much more delicate, tricky little cannabinoid to convert from the CBDA to the CBD. I'm hoping at this point enough people have thrown these terms around that I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining them. Okay. So what we've done here is in this particular strain, the Blue Dream had 62%, as I said, THC. It had no CBD present. Now, this ACDC strain, that is our go-to for the most part. We love Swiss Gold. We love Cannatonic genotype 4, but only genotype 4 for cancer, assuming you have the same genotype 4 that we do. coming from like Lawrence Ringo or somebody in Soham Seeds. Okay, so if you identify the right strains, you can use them over and over and over again with predictable results. So in this case, the ACDC had 2.4%, or in other words, 24 milligrams per gram of THC in it, which is minuscule when you looked at the fact that it had 580 milligrams of CBD. So in that case, if you took a very small dose, to be getting 24 milligrams in relation to the quantity of the CBD, and the CBD blocks the uptake of the THC into the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites. So the little bits that's there is going to be negated by the effect of this CBD anyways. Well, we wanted this child to have this dose at this point. He was on 200 milligrams a day of THC, 100 milligrams a day of CBD, and we wanted him to take this over 3 doses. Now, 3 doses for us means 6 doses, because you have to take your CBD and your THC separately. One of the children that I'll be talking about in a little bit, I'll tell you a story of what happened when that wasn't done, just as an example. The important thing is to have 1 to 2 hours separation in time before you take the CBD or the THC, vice versa, to have that time frame spaced out so that you don't have the competition for what it's doing. Now, I'm not a scientist. I am 100% not a scientist, but I'm an engineer, and I think an engineer's brain works a lot like a scientist. I'm a process engineer by training, and putting together puzzles and figuring out how all this works is what we do. That's what I was trained to do. And cannabis is a very logical medicine. It's like we know that rosemary has health benefits. Well, why does it? Well, gosh, the same terpenes that are in rosemary are also in cannabis. We know that frankincense and lavender and all these things have beneficial, well, they're all in this plant. So why not just go to the plant? So having a starting dose, as I said, of 200 and 100 with 3 doses a day, and I know this is boring, it gets more interesting, but it's important to grasp this first part.
Someone in the crowd.
Oh, God bless you. How was it extracted? Ethanol. Woo! Fully decarbed? What strain? Oh, you're going to have to teach me about that one. I'd love to get a profile on that and check it out. I'll let you know. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I will, as soon as I have it's definitely going down the gullet. Anyway, so in this case, we tell people that they need to get a jeweler's scale going to 0.001. And people will argue, I've heard people argue with me and say, oh, what's the ridiculous? What's the difference? What's the little bit, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, because if we're going to treat this as a science and we're going to treat this as a medicine, we need to know, and we need to be able to track, and we need to be able to repeat over and over and over again so that it becomes the standards. Well, the only way we get those standards is by the annoying requirement that we have that they go down to 0.001. And we record and capture all this information. In this case, this calculator, the Shoop that we have, that one of our patients' fathers built for me, I spec'd it out and he built it, and it's not very fancy, but it does the job. And what it does is it shows, based upon the combination of the THC and the CBD that are in the different products, it takes them, and when you have your total daily dose you want, it takes into account the other sources to which you're getting the same cannabinoids and terpenes. We can use this sometimes we do this with THCA and THC when we're working with some disorders, sometimes with THCA and THC, sometimes CBG. And as we learn more and more about the different cannabinoids, we're able to punch them in, set dosing standards, and try them out, and then have the reporting back, the report loop, which is what's so imperative to understanding and not just something you read on the internet or in a documentary. More and more documentaries need to be done with a medical focus and not a stoner focus. The next time I see somebody blowing bong smoke into a camera, it does so much to defeat what we're trying to do or what we are doing, because that gets the attention. Anyway, in this case, the Blue Dream equals, they would have a daily dose, that middle section there, if I can, I don't know, okay, I don't have a pointer anyway. The middle section there, what it shows is that they will have to have a daily requirement of 0.316, or about 1/3 of a gram in weight of the Blue Dream. And in this case, about 0.177, whatever it is, whatever, which is approximately, just so you know, about 3+ grains of rice. So for those of you who are used to dosing in grains of rice, we expect that a grain of rice is approximately 0.05 milligrams in weight. Obviously, that doesn't tell us what's in the milligrams. But if you're looking to eyeball, now I don't know if that's jasmine or rice-a-roni or wild rice. I know I do have the dimensions because we've actually measured it, and it's exactly the tip size of our syringes. So, however, we don't let people get to where they do that till they've been doing this for at least 3 to 6 months, where they start eyeballing and knowing what their actual dose is. And the way that we are able to compensate for that is by we require them, what we do is we have them weigh their medicine and then send us what it actually says on the scale, and then we can then convert what they're actually giving versus what they're supposed to be giving and see if there's any variation in the dosing that is required in order to make it more effective, and also to have some consistency in dosing and understanding. If every time you went to the medicine chest and you pulled out a bottle of aspirin and you had to guess how many milligrams were in each tablet, would have a lot more stomach bleeds and a lot more casualties than we do right now. It's required that we have labeling. It's required that we know. Unfortunately, it's required by me and my staff. It's not required by the state of California or the government, which is just doesn't even make any sense. It's so counterintuitive that it's like I have to bend my head to Dr. Bob Melamede and what he said yesterday with the blips and flips. I always kind of laugh at that, but sometimes there's just no logic to explain things, so you got to pull something up, so maybe that is it. Maybe they are behind. So anyway, and what this requires then is this person's dose 3 times a day. They would take each the 0.105, which is about 2 grains of rice, and then of the AC/DC, about 1 grain of rice. And by doing this, they were able to have consistency each time, predictability, which is the thing that I think is the most, people that fuels the most fear in cannabis as medicine is the lack of predictability. I mean, how many people have had a bad edible? Or how many people have heard the horror stories where you take something, you don't know what it is, and now that we're working more and more, it's becoming a global phenomenon with these dabs and with the extracts. Used properly, they're one of the most powerful medical tools that we have for instantaneous relief, but used incorrectly, they're being abused very much like you would see crack. Now, I've been told that better they should be abusing cannabis than crack. And I have to say, I completely agree, 100%. You look at the side effects of cannabis, even of heavy usage, and the worst thing that happens is they aren't really contributing to society. Well, these people wouldn't be contributing to society anyway, because if it wasn't cannabis, it would be something else. Now, the first patient I wish to talk about is a little girl who came to me she was 8 and a half, I guess she was just right at 9 months old. Some of you may know, there's a documentary being made by Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein called Weed the People. And several of my patients are being focused on in the documentary. As a result, I have complete permission from all of the parents before I get anything to disclose any and all information about them. Normally, everybody is completely protected under HIPAA, which is our privacy regulations. And I would not be standing here using people's names, talking about their diagnoses. But this is with permission, just to disclose that ahead of time. As Dr. Bierman said about Rodney Dangerfield, I'm not just taking it upon myself. These people speak publicly about what we're doing. Now, I was off at my sister's funeral, who had died from lung cancer as a result of choosing opiates over cannabis. And the traditional medicine of the radiation pneumonitis that actually ended up killing her, CBD would have been so phenomenally helpful, but I was told by the doctors at the hospital that I was just a drug dealer and I had to get out. So she was in a prohibition state, and you know, she decided to listen to her doctors, and I attended her funeral. So I got a call from them about, hey, do you have a minute? We got this little girl. And what had happened was the parents had, gotten this horrible diagnosis of the optic pathway glioma, which is, by the way, not fatal, but it is in her case. But it was 100% guaranteed that she would be blind in her left eye and likely blind in her right eye. Well, you have an 8.5-month little beautiful baby. That's not exactly news that it's like, oh, well, she's not going to die. That's okay. So it was a huge, huge thing. The doctors recommended, as typical, a traditional course of chemotherapy, and the parents said, okay. And then right at the very last minute, and that's where I came into the picture, they had already put a port in and they were getting ready to start, and she said, no, wait. Please, just give me 90 days. And she sought out people, the documentary makers, about cannabis, and they then contacted me, and I flew down and immediately started treating this child. She started on a far lower extract than I would have recommended initially when she started, as a result of intervention from an uneducated, in this case, medical community on pediatric cancer. And the parents were frightened, and so they decided to go with the far, far lower dose. 3 months came, and we all had an expectation, well, they had an expectation that she was going to be the miracle baby, and instead the tumor had grown ever so slightly, but she had developed an enormous cyst in her head that was causing a lot of pressure on her optic nerve, which was seriously impinging her vision. At that point, the parents said, okay, we're taking off the gloves. We're going to do as you've recommended. We're going to up the dose where you say we're going to put it up there. 20 milligrams doesn't kill brain cancer. Not in babies. Not in babies. The younger you are, the higher the dose, unfortunately, is, which is so sad about this, is it's such a, because it's so expensive because of the current state of it, it's out of the reach. Even if it was legal, it's out of the reach of so many families because it's not a scheduled pharmaceutical that you submit to your insurance company. Wouldn't that be nice? Anyway, so we got her started on a more therapeutic dose, and this built up to, she was at 450 milligrams per day of the THC and 275 milligrams with CBD. We had these doses separated out, as I've talked about before, and the importance of keeping the doses separated, and they started the chemo at this time. They did open skull surgery, and we started the higher dose, and then she started chemo. In fact, I'm not sure if it's yesterday or today, or yesterday or the day before, because I'm a little confused on what day it actually is in the United States right now. But she was having her final chemo. So it was a bit of a celebration all around for that. She is a feisty, beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed little girl. Her name, you can find her at a Facebook campaign, Prayers for Sophie. And you'll find that her story is pretty well known and very inspirational. So they predicted the blindness in her left eye and the compromised right eye, and instead she has, as much as you can accurately measure a baby, the pediatric optician has said that her eyesight is near perfect. They have no problem whatsoever, left eye or right eye, and she has a full head of hair. She's running around. She's fat. And she's been on chemo for the last, 13 months, I believe it is. So, now here's an example of a dose. We had her at one point. I won't go into all the details of this here. But at one point, we had her on one called Girl Scout cookies and on canatonic phenotype 4. And we had her at a higher dose initially because we were kind of trying to get her going, you know. It didn't start that in a day, don't get me wrong. We start with a poppy seed and we work our way up over weeks to get to what we consider a therapeutic dose. And there is a way to know what a therapeutic dose is. When a person stops acclimating to the dose, that's when the side effects of cannabis come into play, and that's when it's a negative and you back off. I mean, if you're taking too much and you can't, and it's beyond an ability to function, you're not taking a therapeutic dose. You are overdosing, just like you would with any other drug. There's no reason that a person should not be able to function. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily going to work or driving a car and things like that, but to be feeling like you are whole in yourself on a therapeutic dose. We have kids that are running around like nobody in the world would know there's anything wrong with them. Anyway, in this case, at this dose that she was at, she was getting, we had her on 4. You know, it was part of the acclimation because we were trying to get her up pretty fast because of the complications of the surgery. We got her up, and by doing it through 4 doses, it was like every few hours she was getting medicine around the clock. And at this point, it was around the clock. We were able to adjust that at this point. Now, here's an example of one where I told, this was a purple kush plant, and AC/DC again. And I was able to adjust her dose to the actual dose versus the instructed dose by having the parent weigh it, tell me what the scale weighed, and then be able to do, because it goes to 0.001, able to then calculate backwards that the actual dose at this point that they were giving, I had said 450 and 250, and they were actually giving 432 and 280, which is pretty darn close. Yeah. Now, there's newer ones coming, but this is the before on the left that shows the before using the cannabis. Now, just as a disclaimer, this is actually, I believe, it's a little hard for me to see. I believe this is after the 3-month trial of a low dose, and not, because I see the cyst in here as well. The one you see here in the ladder on the right is what it was last scan, and we'll be doing another scan, I believe, either December or January. I'm not positive how long they're going to wait post, but we have every expectation that the tumor will have continued to decrease or even be gone, and then all we might be looking at that point is the dead cells, the necrosis. So the next one I want to talk about is a little boy named Chico, who came to us, is 10 years old, and he had rhabdomyosarcoma, a particular type of it that was stage 3, group 3, intermediate risk, and this was on, his parents started noticing around Halloween that he was having like what looked like a cyst or a lump right at his carotid artery. And all of a sudden, it just got really big, or either that or, you know how it is, you don't notice. It's there, and then you don't notice. And it was pressing to the point where he was passing out, and they were concerned for his life. They immediately started him on emergency radiation treatment to shrink it, which saved his life. And I'm 100% in favor of appropriate use of radiation and chemotherapy. As well as all other pharmaceuticals when used correctly. Not all pharmaceuticals, but many pharmaceuticals. I wouldn't be standing here today without pharmaceuticals. They've saved my life over and over again, and if I didn't take the ones that I still do take, I wouldn't be here today. So this is not a slam on pharmaceuticals. This is not a slam on the Western model of medicine. Well, it is a slam on the Western model of medicine, but not all Western techniques. There are things that they're doing right, and I think that they should be applauded for that and not seen as the enemy, and instead invite them to the table for the conversation. Now, this little boy was started on one of the most miserable regimens of chemotherapy, and he just happened to be one of those people who just became so sick that he would have to be hospitalized after his chemo treatments. They have to go to the hospital for it, and within a week or two, he was always back in the hospital so that they could control his nausea and pain. This was before we came into the picture. Now, they received some oil from a reliable source that turned out to be made with isopropyl alcohol and not properly purged. And just what somebody who's really, really nauseous and vomiting needs is oil that's going to make them puke. So it wasn't doing very well. However, lo and behold, it was still, in spite of the fact that it was making with ISO, it was also still helping to relieve some of his symptoms, and it was helping the tumors to shrink. So there was a lot of necrosis at the beginning that was able to just kind of the body reabsorb. When they came to us, I want to say it was August of 2013, we separated out, like we do with each of our patients, the THC and CBD. We set him up on a regimen that was outrageously high. Now, the reason for this, let me explain, is we instruct our patients to use the medicine sublingual. That is the highest bioavailability for what we have today. There are a group of doctors I know working on some nanotechnology for a higher, they're promising between 93 and 97% bioavailability of the medication, of the cannabinoids and terpenes. However, that right now is still a dream of world peace. So in the meantime, we do with what we've got. In this case, this little boy, Chico, he had a G-tube and simply refused to eat. So his mother was mixing his medicine in with some coconut oil. She was dosing it, then mixing it with some it was like MCT coconut oil, and so that she could then push it through his G-tube. Well, the bioavailability is so far inferior that way that it requires a much larger dose if you're going to have the same therapeutic result, which is why the 900 milligrams of THC and 500 of CBD are so high. He has been able to control his neutropenia. Through each one of the chemo sessions, he would become neutropenic, in which case we would then lower his THC and build up his CBD dose in order to help protect his immune system from, its antibacterial properties and antifungal. And while these other children were getting opportunistic infections in the hospital, he wasn't. This is a kid that was hospitalized for almost every treatment through and did not get an infection. And that is because of the THC CBD, no question about it, because everybody else around there was sick. Okay. Now, these are some of the things that I want to talk about here that I think are really, really important, and that is Chico missed 15 months of school. That is a lot of school for a little boy to miss. And he wasn't doing school at home during that time. He was playing on his video games and vomiting. And yet when he was able to go back to school, he took 3 months of a bit of tutelage, and he's back up completely with his classmates. So the talk that we hear about how you don't want to give it children because it destroys brain cells and it lowers IQ, we have just not seen that in the evidence from a number of reasons. Number one is socially, how do you know what someone's predicted IQ really is? And once you're talking about somebody who has a life-threatening illness, their life track has just changed exponentially anyway. They're in PTSD from this point forward for the rest of their life. They have to deal with issues of that. They have to deal with issues of the fact that they have just become the focus of their parents' lives and their siblings, and a lot of attention that doesn't need to be, and kids are having to, there's so many reasons I don't need to go into. But anyway, the fact that he was able, and I'll tell you another child as well, to just return to school, and with just a little bit of extra after-school attention, he was right back up with his classmates. And this is a kid who is still, these are his maintenance doses that he's on, okay? He's now 12, and he is still on 150 milligrams of THC and 120 to 125 milligrams a day of CBD. And we were able to, here it was Fire OG in a strain that somebody grew called CBDX. And my big pet peeve here, don't take a strain and name it after your favorite pet project, because it screws us up in understanding the genetics. These names mean something. They might sound ridiculous, Cinderella 99 and Cotton Candy Diesel and Granddaddy Purple, but to a geneticist and to a scientist, they mean you have an expectation of a certain profile, or at least within a range of a profile. So just changing it to another name, it's like, that's why we have over 5,000 strains now, and there was 100, I believe, original landrace strains that were doing just fine. So anyway, in this case, these were the two strains we were working with, the 60% Fire OG with a little bit of the CBD, and then the CBDX, which was a little bit trickier because we got this during a time when there was a huge shortage. The feds came in and started doing raiding, and there's a lot of guerrilla raider groups too. They show up like black ops. They show up all in black. They lower from helicopters. They come in and they cut down. They take all the plants, get back up in their helicopters, and they take off. No paperwork, no being arrested, no showing what official organization it's from. This happened to 3 of our primary CBD growers. We're not talking high THC stoner weed. We're talking high CBD, which is purely medicinal, as much as THC is, don't get me wrong, but there's not like an excuse to say, well, it was really being grown for the recreational market, because they don't want it. You know, why would you want something that's just going to make you feel relaxed but doesn't have any psychoactivity? So that's a medical drug. I don't care. I've tried taking a lot of it, and I've just never had any psychoactivity. Sometimes it makes me feel a little anxious. Sometimes it makes me whatever, but none of that's what I would call. I mean, so does an aspirin. So does standing in front of a group of people and feeling the energy coming from the room can have its own psychoactive activity here. Now, the second one, so right now, Chico, this little boy, he is on, still on this maintenance dose, and now he's dealing with an interesting situation now in that he has developed this vomiting syndrome, the hyperemesis he's developed, where the THC is triggering. So we're going to go through after Christmas or after Thanksgiving, and he's become to where if he misses a dose, he starts having nausea. So we're going to go through a process after Thanksgiving where we're going to take a couple of weeks to just, I'm going to get shot for the terminology because I say clean the receptor sites, but it's really just clear and make them have to work a little harder on their own. And so that we can reset it and hopefully at this point drop his dose even further than what it is right now. Now this little girl, astrocytoma, this little girl, Nicole, came to us, and it was like a patient of ours' mom called and begged us to take this little girl. She was 2 years, 9 months when she was diagnosed with an astrocytoma in her brain stem and spine. It had gone into her spine. And they first went to the doctor because of her ear pain, and she was crying and she was miserable. And if anyone's ever had a child that had an ear infection or something, imagine the pain they're in. Well, imagine if you've got a brain tumor pressing. It wasn't very pleasant. They described it to me as being in a permanent state of migraine as far as the level of pain that she was experiencing. And they asked us if, at that time, we were not taking any new patients, but if for compassionate purposes, if we would be willing to take on this little girl. Well, obviously the answer was yes. So we started dosing her, and I'll show you here. I had her on about low. I was looking to go I wasn't looking to kill her cancer. I was looking palliative here. We were trying to get this kid out of pain, but the parents' even attitude was, "There's no way she's going to live." So part of what we do with patients is we have a very in-depth 8-page patient intake form that we do with everybody that requires medical records. It requires that you are committed, and one of the things we do is we ask people what their objective is, and then we have this big Likert scale of asking people what their level of commitment is. And I tell them, I'll put in exactly as much level of commitment to it as you will, but I'm certainly, we are people come to us by attraction. We don't promote. So if you're going to do what you're told, then you get to stay. If not, you don't. So in order to make the decisions and have the maximized success, we need to understand the entire family history. We need to know what's going on with your mother, your father, your grandparents, your home life. We need to know what you eat. Because if you you can take all the cannabis in the world, but if you're going out and eating sugar and you're going out and eating processed foods and junk, then you are arming the enemy by the glucose cells that feed the cancer cells. They are not blocked by the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites. They are not blocked by the cannabinoids. They are not blocked by chemotherapy and radiation. The glucose will find a way to feed those cancer cells. So when you give yourself or you give your child sugar or anything that metabolizes into glucose in your body, and like I said, I'm not a doctor, so I know this vaguely, I understand, but I certainly see it in action on a daily basis. If you eat sugars that metabolize as glucose in your body, or foods, certain carbohydrates, etc., then you are arming the enemy. You are giving the cancer cells a way. I equate it to putting a Kevlar vest on these cells and protecting it from everything that you threw it. So you're wasting your money. Any treatment you're going to do, you're throwing away, or you're making it so much more difficult for it to be successful that it's like, why not be an active part of your care? Now, that's also one of the objections and the things to cannabis therapy is you can't just pop a pill and call me in the morning. You gotta eat right. You gotta sleep right. You gotta have a good home environment where you're being supported, because it's a mind, body, spirit. All disease got us in that place in the first place because of an equilibrium with the mind, body, and spirit. Well, if you take the same situation and you start putting good into it and you start feeding the body the correct fuels and you start giving it the right medicines, meditation, prayer, whatever your deal is, then you're going to have a lot better shot of success than you are if you just think that you can take this and then go about your bad behaviors. Thank you. So this little girl, she came to us initially, like I said, just palliative care was all we were looking for, which, you know what? If that was all it did, that's enough. That's enough. But lo and behold, the tumor started shrinking. And we were like, wait a minute, we need to take a look at another dose. Now, I don't know if I have another shoop here with me. No, I wish I did. Because I need to update this slide deck. But we ended up going up to what I would consider okay, let's save this kid's life now. Let's get busy. And she's up around 450 milligrams of THC, and she's on, I believe, about 200 milligrams of CBD per day right now. And her mother just had another baby. The little girl's thriving. She's a little jealous. She's a little over 3 years old now. And this mother was pregnant, worrying about burying her child. Instead, the pictures would rip your heart out, or just make you be so happy of the mother in the hospital having the new baby, and then little Morgan holding his hand. And she's a beautiful, healthy, fat little girl at 3 years old with the brain tumor that was supposed to kill her. Okay, this next child. Now, here's what's important. This little boy came to us with pineoblastoma, and his family lives in a non-cannabis, it's a prohibition state. And as a result, we require, because we are completely transparent and legal, required that they come and travel to California, become California residents, which fortunately is a matter of walking into a DMV and saying, I'm going to be here for 30 days, I need a California ID. And they go, sure, that's all it takes. Now, having said that, you have to be a U.S. citizen in order to get that. You have to bring a passport or a birth certificate. They will not take your driver's license. Believe me, we've tried. So in this case, the family came as refugees from Indiana and got the medicine. How they got it home, I have absolutely no idea. It's a black box to me. But they were having to use this without any kind of communication with their doctors about what they're doing, and they've had to do that all along. They have not been able to explain the miraculous results they're getting from these patients. They're not able to, have the doctors work. So we're having to do everything clandestine as far as the timing of the medications. And when he's been hospitalized for various reasons, which is just part of of kind of just the way it is, unfortunately, when you're using traditional chemotherapies and radiation, at some point you're going to be, most of the time, someone's going to be hospitalized. Anyway, so they can't tell what they're doing, so they have to try to sneak it in. So some of his care went up and down a little bit just because they didn't have access to get it to him or to give it to him, or it was being too closely monitored, that sort of thing. But in the meantime, even with all these obstacles, and even with the fact that this child is not the easiest kid to work with as far as wanting to take his medicine, the father, even though they put a G-tube in, and the father says, I don't care if you hate me for 2 minutes twice a day, I am putting this under your tongue. And he holds the kid and he does it, and then he rewards him with whatever his favorite thing is that's non-glucose, natural whole food. And as a result, the tumor after the first MRI had been reduced by 25%. The next one in May, where it had lost its color, and the doctors were saying, well, it was just continuing to die. The tumor was just disappearing. And where he is as far as the progression of his illness, or I should say his trek back to wellness, is that the doctors are just astounded and don't understand. He just had a scan. I spoke at I don't remember where I spoke. I think it was in Denver. And as I was getting off the stage, the parents sent me the latest update on his, let me see if I have it in here. I can't remember, sorry. Went in the wrong direction. I want to show you his, where is it? Sorry, guys. Here we go. So, on the right in this case was the one in February, and that was after he had already been on the cannabis, so it is fair to say he started on the cannabis in early December of 2013. So this was a scan that was taken after the cannabis had already started to work its magic. And then in May of 2014, you'll notice that there's almost no evidence of the tumor left at all. And I received an update from this father a few days ago, and his last scan was so good that they are no longer going to be scanning his spine, only his skull from this point forward. So that's from doctors who don't even know he's on cannabis. Right. Okay, I know this isn't very exciting, but the precursor be acute lymphoblastic leukemia. That's an awfully big name for disease for a very, very tiny little boy. And when his parents got the diagnosis of their son Silas's condition, and he's one that you can follow on Strength for Silas, if you're interested. They all have their own Facebook and their fundraising and all the things that they do in order to be able to help their children with this very costly and very complex medicine. Well, anyway, when he was first diagnosed, the interesting thing is these parents have been in the cannabis movement for years. In fact, their father is a grower and a trimmer. And yet they knew nothing about the medicine, nothing about it as medicine. I mean, as real medicine, as something that's like not folk medicine or a homeopathic that you take, or something that you take as a nutraceutical. It's probably a better word than homeopathic. They didn't understand. They knew that it was, you just felt better when you smoked, but they didn't know anything beyond that. So all of a sudden, they have a little boy with a very, very serious type of leukemia, and they don't even know where to begin. Now, as it was, the United Patients Group had, who I'm very honored to work with, had work in a conjunction with, not with as in for. They were holding a screening of a documentary called Drug War 2, and in Mill Valley, which is not too far from me in Marin, near San Francisco. And I happened to meet them. I was there, and I had met them that evening, and so I arranged for them to receive a couple of syringes of oil from a patient of ours, a very, very elderly man who was using it palliatively, and he passed away before they even opened these 2 syringes. And so I said, will you be willing to donate those to this needy family? Which they were, which gratefully. And I did not keep in touch that much with the family, but I would send them little notes, but I hadn't gone through my usual protocol with them. I didn't do what I normally do, which is you don't get any medicine until we do a patient intake. You don't get any medicine until I have a commitment to the work that we're going to do, and we're going to do this and what your level of objective is. And when I finally got the mom to contact me again after a couple of months, a few months, he was lethargic. His mouth and diaper area were full of sores as a result of the toxicity from the chemotherapy. He wasn't eating. He was thin. He was balding. He was really not doing very well. As soon as we separated back out, what they did was they took the 2 syringes I gave them, decided to make life easy on themselves, and they combined them. And they started giving him the medicine together. Well, there was absolutely as much, well, in this case, let's see what it was. In this case, there's not, this probably wasn't the one initially, but we're talking about when you've got 590 milligrams of CBD in one strain and 700 milligrams of another, and you mix them together, they're not going to, the CBD1 and CB2 receptor sites are not going to have an opportunity to do their job because you're drowning it all out with the CBD, which is an antagonist. So we immediately just separated it back out, and then I provided them with it's a topical application that we make that is full of essential oils, and the oils, each one of those, are also terpenes that are they're also available as terpenes in other plants. So what we did is we selected essential oils from where we could get the highest concentrations of the required medicinal terpenes, like myrcene and borneol and linalool and limonene, and I mean there's a myriad of them. But so we know what these do, so let's just add them back in. Let's add them back in. And we do that by using the distilled essential oils from lavender, sage, rosemary. Rosemary, by the way, everybody should have a rosemary plant in their kitchen. Eat it, put the leaves in whatever you eat. It's just a fantastic source of beautiful terpenes. We're still on the search for Ashanti pepper, black pepper, which is the highest source of beta-caryophyllene that's known of. Or that I know of, and so far I have not been able to travel to East Africa to pick any up, and frankly they don't have a lot available on the internet that's authentic. And so if anybody does come across that is, number 1 is black Ashanti pepper, number 2 is white, and number 3 is cannabis as sources for beta-caryophyllene, which is one of the most medically beneficial. It is the only known terpene that I know of at this point that will activate the CB2 receptor site, or with CB2 receptor site, without blocking the uptake of the THC at the same time. Somebody else could explain the science of that much better than me. All I know is it works. The same way that if you want to have the myrcene to have it be more effective, you eat a mango. They're all plants in nature. It's just a matter of knowing how to combine them. So anyway, we took this topical, and we put some around his lips, and we put some on his bum, and within minutes, he was smiling, he was laughing, he was happy, he was asking for something to drink. They were having trouble keeping him hydrated because it was so painful in his mouth. He didn't want to have anything. And I have a video that I took of him running around my house just minutes after he had come in and been laying lethargically, almost fetal, in his mother's lap. This particular experiment we've repeated over and over and over again, and now we just provide it for any of our patients that are in a diaper or going through a type of chemotherapy where they have the risk of having the sores, which is pretty much just about all of them, unfortunately. This is the same thing as if for each of us, if we would have this in our medicine cabinets as a first go-to for first aid, the miraculous healing properties of cannabis and what it can do as an antibacterial, an antifungal, it can do as an anti-inflammatory. I mean, the list is really, I mean, if you want a good resource, Steep Hill Hayland. Dr. Bierman showed a really excellent example. Steep Hill Hayland has a terpene and cannabinoid chart on their website. I think you can go to steephill.com and find it. Anyway, it's a really good reference for which, it's a starting point for which terpenes for which thing, which cannabinoids for which thing, so that you know where to start. Because, you know, it's like to a hammer, everything's a nail. But fortunately, cannabis isn't a hammer. Cannabis is the whole toolbox. So this little boy has continued to thrive. He is now been cancer. He's, you know, no signs of it. He was a slow responder, so he was required to go through a ridiculously long period of chemo of 3.5 years, which is really, you know, outrageous when you're talking about a 1-year-old 1.7. When I asked them why so many, and they said because when you look at the chart and it's got this diagnosis and this age, that's how many you get. Doesn't matter if you're doing better or worse, it's just a one-size-fits-all. And because of the laws that protect the children over the parents, if they do not comply, they run the risk of Child Protective Services coming to their home and taking their child away from them. And this is happening even in legal states if parents are refusing to comply with some of the draconian sort of medical procedures that are being required for their children, and they have no say over it. And even when they know that there's cannabis, if they're not educated about cannabis, then it doesn't help in any way either. Now, this little boy, interestingly, he had a seizure last week, and which he had not had before. He was airlifted. His family lives up in Eureka, which is quite a number of hours away from San Francisco, and he's being treated at UCSF. And they airlifted him and they immediately said it's from the THC. He's having a seizure because of the THC. This is what the doctor said. Well, the mom calls me hysterical. Oh my God, they're going to make him go on Keppra. They're going to make him go on. And in the list of the drugs that they were adding, she sent me a picture, and it was just pathetic. The number of pharmaceuticals that it opened the machine's door, that no longer was he now just part of the oncology machine. Now he's a part of the seizure machine and all the pharma packet that goes with that for a little boy that has it. And after I was lucky enough to, the mother is very forceful, and she arranged a conference call between myself and the head neuro-oncology pediatric doctor at UCSF, one of the fellows, and the social worker. They assured me that they would be lowering his chemotherapy from this point forward to a much lower maintenance dose, because they understood then the importance of and they admitted that the chemotherapy could actually trigger the seizure and not the cannabinoids and terpenes. So that was a huge win. They did ask to be kept in the loop from now on, which we are more than happy to do. We welcome being keeping doctors in the loop. Any opportunity we have to educate, the better. Here are his doses. I don't want to go through them again, but I do want to take a minute to do the conclusions here. And that is, it is possible to dose correctly and consistently. That has been established. Now, it's not being done well. It's still cumbersome, it's still awkward, it's still a lot of work. It takes, not everybody has the natural intelligence, or frankly, math is a problem for a lot of people, just to get them to understand that a percentage is just as a measurement of hundredths is too much to get a lot of people to understand in this. So we got to do better on that. But in the meantime, we are figuring out ways to take strains and take the resulting test results. That test result is the most important thing. In understanding that test result, how to use that as a medicine and consistently dose it to where the patient has an expectation of consistency. Now, the collaboration with medical team and individualized treatment plans are key. I'm just going to anecdotally tell you very quickly. I lived in California from 1994, and in 2005, I moved for 3 years to Colorado. The reason I moved was because I lived in a 4-story house and I was in a wheelchair. So there wasn't much that I could do. My neighbors were not cooperative. My doctors had me on 26 pharmaceuticals, as was mentioned, but being on fentanyl patch and being on, which I don't know if you know, I don't know the Australian equivalent of it, but it sucks. It's a time-released, miserable, long, and it's put in a topical patch that you wear and it soaks in. Well, methadone, Norco, and then all the drugs to counteract those, the Lyricas, all those drugs. I had no quality of life. And they said, there's nothing else we can do for you except just give you more opiates or give you a different opiate. Or they tried to give me antidepressants. They gave me Cymbalta. They gave me Wellbutrin. It's like, I'm not depressed, I'm in pain. Yeah, it's depressing, but this isn't in my mind. My spine is damaged from bacterial spinal meningitis. It's not getting, this isn't going to go away with a little, call me in the morning. So I moved to Colorado, and I go to a pain doctor there, and I work very, very hard to get down off of my dose that I was at on all of my pharmaceuticals. When I found out I was going to be a grandmother, I made the decision to eliminate as many of my pharmaceuticals because I wanted to be awake. I wanted to experience my life instead of being spent everywhere I was just always nodding. In a constant state of nod, which is just not very attractive, and it's certainly not a way to engage in the world or learn very much. So I got to Colorado, same thing at the pain doctor. I go off of all them. He applauds me, stands up, gives me a hug, all this and that. Still no mention by anybody in California or Colorado that cannabis was an option for me. Not one. I went to every top physician at UCSF. I went to the top doctors at the system down in La Jolla, in Torrey Pines. I was treated in Colorado by some of the best doctors there. I even was getting treated for hepatitis C that I'd gotten from a blood transfusion, and nobody at any particular time, not one person ever mentioned cannabis to me. I finally learned about cannabis from a woman that read one of my blog posts who was she used to make brownies for her boyfriend who was a long-haul trucker. And she was up in Oregon and was like, she's the first I even knew that it was an option. I'd seen it in TV shows and stuff, but it always just showed people smoking and getting high and being stupid. I had no idea that this was actually a medicine. I'd lived in 2 of the most progressive states with the cannabis laws, starting in 1994 and then in 2005, and not one time did a medical professional. So if you think that it's not important to integrate the medical community as educate them, you know about it, but look around. You are a very select universe. You are not representative of the population of the world. You are a very select few that are here today, and it's very easy to get into a situation where everybody you talk to knows what you know, and so you think everybody does. Well, they don't. I'm standing here to tell you right now, I'm a very, very intelligent person, and I knew nothing about cannabis whatsoever. And nothing in my society, my doctors, my community did anything to make that any better. So I hope that this time you will look at working with your doctors and not around your doctors. Now the cannabis plant, thank you. The cannabis plant is very important that it is the sum of its parts. It is greater than the individual parts because of the entourage effect, because of the synergistic way that they all work together. I do recommend that each of my parents get a prescription for Marinol for their child. They don't have to fill it, they don't have to use it, but at least they have that so that if the child is using THC and they're tested, that they have a legitimate pharmaceutical, because in a lab, THC doesn't show up from cannabis any different than it does from Marinol. So that's one little suggestion to get around it. Now, also the adherence to the protocol. I mentioned earlier, of course, about what happens when they take the two strains, they mix them together, you don't have the effectiveness. If you are taking other drugs for part of your treatment, you're taking pharmaceuticals that metabolize through the cytochrome P450 in your liver, you need to take THC and CBD separately, at least 1 to 2 hours apart. The THC will make the liver enzyme that filters the pharmaceutical much lazier, just like it does us, and make it much lazier, and it will increase the potency of whatever the dosage that you're taking. So if you're supposed to be on 25 milligrams, it'll feel like a hell of a lot more than 25 milligrams if you take them at the same time. Conversely, if you take things that are high in CBD at the same time you take these drugs that go through this pathway, then it makes the filter stronger, and as a result, you get less of a therapeutic dose from the pharmaceuticals that you're taking. And I'm almost finished. So that's why this is very, very important here. Now, the cannabinoid treatment reduces the negative effects of chemotherapy side effects. If this was all it did, that's enough. That's enough. Why can't that just be enough? It doesn't have to do everything and make you coffee in the morning. It just has to make it bearable for these people to have the treatments that they're going through to save their lives. Why is that not enough? So that is the number one question going forward. And then best practices in extraction, testing, and advising need to be established. If you don't have people measuring, you don't have people having tested medicine that you know exactly what they're taking in order to repeat it over and over again, this is all a crapshoot, and it'll consider to be looked down upon as quote unquote anecdotal. Well, if the FDA, and which is our big behemoth to deal with, if they will not give us standards for doing a study, we'll just do our own, and that's basically what we're doing now. Now, however, because of compassionate purposes, I can't even imagine not including somebody because they have a particular ailment or a particular type of cancer that does not fit into our model. I leave that to the scientists, and in the meantime, I'll just keep dealing with the patients. Now, testing and supply chain must be improved to succeed as a medicine. We ran into a situation where we had a shortage as a result of these horrible raids, and I had to send patients elsewhere for medicine. I had 5 children who became ill because they tested for this, but they didn't test for that kind of thing. The medicine was not consistent. It was not up to the standards that we have for our patients, and as a result, 5 kids got sick. Now, in the scheme of things, I'm sure that they still continued to work on apoptosis and anti-inflammatory and all those things too, but who wants to have your child vomiting on top of everything else when they're already... So to have it, the first thing that you want to do to prove that this is a medicine is start setting up testing standards and dosing standards as a medicine. And I think that you'll hear the conversation change because that's something people can get their hands around and they can understand and it makes sense. So lastly, gratitude. I like to show this. I want to thank you to the warrior moms and dads, sisters and brothers, daughters and sons who've committed to an integrated path through their loved one's cancer journey. This is a passionate group of people. The Lucys and her family of the world. I mean, this is an amazing group of warriors, you who go against the laws and whatever for what's your right to save your family members and your own lives. And I think that you need to be honored as such and not as criminals. And we are eternally grateful to our patients for allowing us to be of service to them. Now, Stuart is our chief extraction expert. And he also happens to be my husband. And Kira is my assistant, and Jeff is my husband's, and they work with all the medicine itself, and then we work with all the patients, and along with nurses. And in fact, I encourage the Nursing Association here to work with us to become educated in understanding how to advise patients on strains and on testing, or at least on profiles. And anything we can do, because no two people have the same endocannabinoid system. No two people are alike. Thank you.